After nearly 300 years of Targaryen rule, the Seven Kingdoms of Westeros suffered under the reign of Aerys II, a cruel, mad king stirring the people of his realm to anger and violence with his terrible leadership. Although Aerys had many years of prosperous rule, those were largely due to his old friend Tywin Lannister, who governed as Hand of the King. Yet as Aerys grew increasingly mad in later years, their friendship suffered greatly and Tywin resigned his position, leaving the realm to the lunatic whims of the unbalanced king. Yet the first tear in what would ultimately rip apart the kingdom came not from Aerys, but from his son, Prince Rhaegar Targaryen. During a tournament held by Lord Went of Harrenhal, Prince Rhaegar was named champion. As was tradition, it was his duty to name a woman Queen of Love and Beauty, presenting her with a crown of blue winter roses. Everyone expected Rhaegar to name his wife Elia Martell of Dorne, yet he did not, instead moving past her to crown Lyanna Stark, the betrothed of Lord Robert Baratheon. This was later described as the moment when all the smiles died. Rhaegar's infatuation with Lyanna eventually resulted in what many believed was her abduction, an act which outraged House Stark and Baratheon. Lyanna's older brother, Brandon Stark, rode at once for the Red Keep, where he stood outside the walls, screaming for Rhaegar to come out and face him. However, Rhaegar was not present at the time, and so King Aerys had Brandon and his companions arrested. When Brandon and Lyanna's father, Lord Rickard Stark, traveled south to answer the charges against his son, he demanded a trial by combat, the right of every noble lord. Aerys granted him the right, but named Fire as the champion of House Targaryen. Rickard was then tied to the rafters inside his armor, and a fire was lit underneath. Brandon Stark was present with a noose around his neck. A sword was placed just outside his reach, and he strangled himself trying to get the sword and save his father, who was being roasted alive. After their execution, the Mad King sent word to Lord Jon Arryn of the Vale, demanding the death of Lord Rickard's second son, Eddard Stark, and Lyanna's betrothed, Robert Baratheon. Lord Arryn, however, refused to betray the men he'd raised as his foster sons, and so the three lords raised their banners in rebellion. As the armies of the Vale rose to answer Lord Arryn's call to war, some in the territory chose to side with the Targaryen king, and so Mark Grafton went about gathering loyalist supporters in Gulltown. In response, Lord Arryn marched his army and laid siege to Gulltown, with Robert Baratheon leading the charge over its walls, and slaying Mark Grafton in the fighting. After the defeat of the royalists in the Vale, Robert Baratheon went south to gather his forces in the Stormlands, but here too the territory was split, with several lords siding with the Targaryens and gathering their armies at Summerhall. Yet they were not prepared to deal with the strength and fury of the Lord of the Stormlands, who marched his forces to Summerhall, winning 3 battles in a single day and eliminating the threat within his realm by capturing many of the lords who fought against him and winning them over to his cause. Robert then led a host out of the Stormlands to face the loyalist Lord Randall Tarly at the Battle of Ashford, where Robert was defeated for the first time in the war and tried to join the remnants of his army with his allies in the north. After the battle, the armies of the Reach laid siege to Storm's End, which was being held by Robert's brother Stannis Baratheon, who, despite the lack of supplies, refused to surrender, only surviving because of food smuggled into the castle by a man named Davos Seaworth. Robert Baratheon, meanwhile, was being chased by royalist forces as he fled north, forced to seek refuge in the town of Stony Sept, where the people were loyal to his cause and protected him from those in pursuit. In King's Landing, Aerys II grew increasingly worried and soon came to realize Robert Baratheon was a serious threat. Rallying the Crown Lands, the Reach, and Dorne to his side, the Westerlands and Iron Islands chose to remain neutral for most of the war. After their losses early on, Hand of the King Owen Merryweather was blamed, and in punishment was stripped of his lands and titles, replaced in his position by Jon Cunnington, a friend of Rhaegar and Lord of Griffin's Roost. And so it was Jon Cunnington who led an army to the Stony Sept and searched for Robert Baratheon, going from house to house, using threats, taking hostages, and offering great rewards for information concerning his whereabouts. Yet still, the people of the town continued protecting him, and he was not discovered. Eventually, Robert's friends Jon Arryn, Eddard Stark, and their newest ally, Lord Hoster Tully of the Riverlands, marched on the small town and fought the royalist forces in the Battle of the Bells. When Robert saw that his allies were engaging the enemy, he charged out of the brothel where he'd been hiding and joined in the fight, nearly killing Jon Cunnington, who was defeated and forced into retreat. retreat. The Mad King grew suspicious of the Hand of the King after this loss, and stripped Lord Cunnington of his titles, exiling him to Essos, and replacing him with Lord Carleton Chelstead. Further north, Lord Eddard Stark and Lord Jon Arryn further cemented their alliance with the Riverlands through Eddard's marriage to Hoster Tully's eldest daughter, Catelyn, while Jon Arryn married the younger daughter, Lysa. The decisive battle of the war was then fought on the River Trident, where Prince Rhaegar Targaryen led his armies against the rebels. Fighting a desperate battle, Robert and Rhaegar finally met and clashed in single combat. Amidst the chaos of battle, Robert raised his mighty warhammer and struck down his enemy, crushing Rhaegar's chest and causing the rubies inlaid upon his armor to scatter into the river, thereafter known as the Ruby Ford. With their victory at the Trident, the war was all but won for the rebels, and so Lord Quellin of the Iron Islands was convinced by his sons to strike out in support of Robert and his allies. However, Lord Quellin feared sailing with his full strength, since that would leave the Iron Islands vulnerable to attack by the Westerlands, who had not yet chosen a side in the war, and so Lord Quellin set sail with a small force of 50 longships to attack the Reach, and died in the battle at the Mander, causing his fleet to return home with little accomplished. In the Westerlands, Lord Tywin, who until this point had kept House Lannister out of the war, now marched his army to King's Landing, claiming to have arrived in defense of the king. Although Varys tried to warn the king not to open the city gates, Grand Maester Pycelle was able to convince him that Tywin was loyal. However, Lord Tywin had no intention of joining a losing cause, and so once within the walls, he ordered the city sacked, killing or capturing any Targaryen loyalists they found. Among those killed was Rhaegar's wife, Elia Martell, and their young children, Rhaenys and Aegon. Within the Red Keep, Jaime Lannister of the Kingsguard learned that the Mad King was planning to destroy the capital by igniting jars of wildfire placed strategically beneath the city. When the Hand of the King, Carleton Chelstead, learned of this terrible plot, he tried to stop it and even resigned his position, only for the king to have him burned alive with wildfire, then naming the pyromancer Rosart as his new Hand of the King. Now that Jaime learned the truth, he too felt he must act, and so betrayed his oath, slicing the throat of the Mad King and ending his reign of terror. Although the Lannisters had the capital, the armies of Robert's allies soon arrived and took command of the city, proclaiming Robert Baratheon as the new king of Westeros. He claimed his legitimacy through his grandmother, Rhaelle Targaryen, youngest daughter of King Aegon V. Although this minor connection to Targaryen blood was the official reason given for his ascension to the throne, in truth, Robert won the crown through combat and kept the realm together through strength of arms and strategic alliances, such as his marriage to Lord Tywin's daughter, Cersei Lannister. Yet not all were happy with the way the war was ending, as Eddard Stark spoke out harshly against the murder of the Targaryen children. Getting into a heated argument with his friend Robert, Eddard left the capital in anger and marched with an army south to break the siege of Storm's End. Stannis Baratheon was then ordered to raise a fleet and capture Dragonstone. Although the king and most of the royal family were killed, a pregnant Queen Rhaella escaped to the nearby island, along with her son Viserys. Unfortunately, the queen died shortly after giving birth to a baby girl during a storm. The garrison at Dragonstone then made plans to save themselves by giving up Viserys and his baby sister Daenerys Stormborn to the new king of Westeros. But the Targaryen loyalist Sir Willem Darry would not allow it and smuggled them off the island, taking them to live as exiles in Braavos. After freeing Storm's End, Lord Eddard Stark led a small party of 6 companions south to the Tower of Joy in Dorne, where his sister Lyanna Stark was being held. Guarded by Sir Arthur Dayne, Sir Oswell Went, and Lord Commander Gerald Hightower of the Kingsguard, the Northmen engaged them in a vicious battle that ended in the death of everyone except Eddard Stark and his companion Howland Reed. Although victorious, Lord Stark was too late to save his sister's life, and she died in a pool of blood. Eddard arrived just in time to hear her final words, in which she asked him to make a secret promise, which he agreed to keep and never revealed. With the war over and the last of the Targaryens exiled across the sea, Robert Baratheon was left as sole claimant to the Iron Throne and made peace with those that fought against him, ruling for many years as King of Westeros. Do your shopping on Amazon? Then why not use the link in the description box below to either enter the Canadian or American Amazon sites, where you support the channel with every purchase at no extra cost to you. So if you do your shopping on Amazon anyway, why not use the link below and help support CivilizationEx? A special thanks to all those who contribute to Civilization X, like Barristan, the soft bastard Beesbury, Noble and Apprentice Maester, Glegnus, son of Vorin, Knight of the X, Jordan Stark, and Simon Toyne, Mystery Knight and rabble-rouser. If you would like to help Civilization X, click on the Patreon link, and please be sure to like and subscribe, and click on the links to see more.